Hi everybody, it's Stefan again for AETUTS and in today's tutorial we are going to take a look at the Lenscare plugins which provide great board effects. So let's create a new comp using these two 3D renders, and let's start with the depth of field plugin, which is similar. Both plugins are similar to the After Effects lens blur. So we are going to start with the depth of field plugin, which is more complicated and provides more control and options. And I'm going to walk you through all the settings and explain everything. And basically the plugin, even the plugins are similar to the After Effects built-in lens blur, they provide more realistic and better results. So I encourage you to get those plugins and boost your work to the next level. So let's see what we've got here. First of all, we have option that shows us different things that the plugin uses for the blur. For example, you can see the iris shape or the depth buffer if you select a depth map layer. So we're going to talk about these things here later on because they are related to the other settings. So the first thing, we have a depth layer, which we can choose this layer to be our depth layer, and we have a radius for the blur. As you can see, as I increase the radius of the blur, the picture gets blurred. We have a focal point and select depth, so we can move the point to make the things come in focus, or if we reset that, you can just select a part of the image that you want to be in focus and just click on it, and basically it will calculate and offset the depth map, so this part of the image is in focus and this part here is out of focus, which is pretty helpful. And if we come here and choose show sharp zone, you can see that this part of the image is sharp in focus. Basically the highlighted areas will be sharp in focus and everything else will be out of focus. So as I move this point, you can see the focal plane, how it moves and how the different parts of the image are affected. So this is pretty helpful feature, and it will allow you easily to set up your focal plane, and it shows pretty clearly what exactly will be sharp in focus. So this is pretty helpful. Let's get back to the normal blur, and let's say for example we want our focus to be right about here, maybe like so, and let's get back to the normal blur. The next thing is highlight intensity, and basically if we increase that, you're not going to see any difference, and that's related with the highlight selection. So let's open this setting and you see the enable checkbox. If we enable that and if we crank that to 5 or 15, you probably, it depends of the image you're using, but it should blow up the highlights. So let's set this to 1 and let's select the highlight selection only. This will allow us to see what part of the image will be used for the highlight selection. and here you can select a alternative selection layer, probably a different render or image sequence with different settings, or maybe some brightness or levels effects applied to increase the brightness, so you get the wider highlight selection. Or you can keep the original layer, which is this one, and you can select your highlight range. So as you can see, we have whiteness start and whiteness end, which are basically the most important settings here. So if we set the whiteness start to a lower number, you can see that we get some white areas of the image. And if we get back to normal blur and increase the highlight intensity to 3, you see how these parts get brighter and brighter. And if we crank that to 15, you can see that they're clipping. So basically this is what the highlight intensity does. Let's get back to highlight selection only, and we can set the highlight end, and this is basically like a levels adjustment for the highlight selection of the blur, which is pretty helpful and can save you a lot of time. And of course we have an offset for the highlight, which you can use, and we have a like softening the whiteness. For example, if you don't want to have so hard highlights, you can soften that, but that's up to you and depends on your taste. And that's about the whiteness selection. Let's move on to the hue, and here you can control the colors of the highlights and stuff like that, I guess. For example, this is basically provides the same control as the whiteness, but for the hue and for the saturation. So you can play with the settings and achieve the look that you're going for. So basically, as you can see, we have the same settings but just for a different channels, and that's pretty helpful. And the next thing that we have is the gamma correction, which, as you can see, makes everything a bit brighter. Let's take a look at this part of the image. We have a gamma correction, and if we click that, it gets brighter. So you can choose to gamma correct or not correct your image, which is really helpful sometimes. The next thing we have is the depth buffer, which basically is this image right here, and we have first option to invert it. So if we invert it, basically it's doing the same thing if we apply a invert effect to this image right here, but it does it right here in the plugin. So this is really helpful. And we have a take depth from luminance, alpha, red, green or blue channels, so that's pretty helpful, even though the times you get the depth from the luminance channel. That might be pretty helpful. The next thing that we have is the iris, which affects the iris shape. So let's come to show iris here, and you can see by default the iris is perfect circle, even that we have only 3 iris blades. and we have a rounded facets. So as you can see, if I turn this down to 0, it will be a triangle, and if I increase the number of iris blades, you can see the shape changes. So let's set this to 8, because most of the lenses have 8 iris blades, and we can round them a bit like so. Also, you can offset the shape. Let's decrease this to 5 to see it better. You can offset the angle of the iris as needed. You can make it rounder to perfect circle, or just a bit round like so. Also, we have a border brightness. As you can see, what this does is makes the border brighter, and we have a border thickness. So in the rear lenses, the borders are a bit brighter than the inside, so you can achieve this effect tweaking these settings here. And of course, we have a aspect for the iris shape, so you can deform it as needed. Let's keep it 0 right now. And as you can see, how this affect our image if we crank this, the border brightness, you can see we get some strange results. And basically this is how it's going to look, but you have to be careful with these settings, because you can achieve great results, but you can ruin your effect. So be careful and don't overdo these effects. And basically that are the most important settings. Everything I've covered so far are the most important settings that will have impact on your final result, and everything that I've not covered is not so important, so don't worry about that. And finally, we have outside image options, and what this does, let's scale down our image, is basically something like a repeat edge pixels, but in a more advanced way. And for example, if we can set the vertical border color to repeated image if we blur this a lot, and it takes a bit to calculate because the effect is very heavy. But if we set this to repeated image, you can see that our image starts to repeat from, it's like the part that is missing on the top, it's showing on the bottom. So that's the first option. We have a mirrored image, which might be useful in some cases, as you can see. And the next thing we have is a border color, and it takes a few seconds to render. And here is the outside color. You can change this, for example, to something bright, like so. It takes some time to render. Better drop the resolution to half so it renders quickly. That are basically the options for our image. As you can see, if I set the horizontal setting to color, it will get the color we put here. If we change this color, it changes. And it's the same for the vertical, as you can see. And basically this slider affects the edge of your image, as you can see how thick it's going to be. So basically that's it, everything for the depth of field blur plugin. It creates some very interesting and great blur effects, and it's way better using depth maps compared to the After Effects built-in lens blur plugin. So this plugin is a must for everybody who does some depth things like depth of field and stuff like that. It's pretty helpful. And let's take a look at the next plugin, which is the autofocus, and it's basically a similar to the depth blur, but it don't have the option to select the depth map. So basically we have the same options except the depth layer. We have the radius of the blur, we have preserve highlights and additive highlights, which is the same as the highlight intensity in the depth of field blur. So if we set this to 2, we need to come to the highlight selection, enable it, and just play with the settings, and you can see how this will affect our image, and that's pretty helpful. Again, you can select an alternative layer for the highlights, and we have these other options for the different channels. We have the same option for the outside image like in the depth of field plugin, and we have the same settings for the iris here, but the difference here is that we can create a custom iris shape. For example, let's create a new composition and let's call it custom iris. Let's create a new layer, make it white, and let's apply a star, for example. This is our star, and we come back to our main composition, put the custom iris here, and if we select the custom iris composition, you can see that it updates, and no matter what we change here, it will use this shape. So this is pretty helpful if you want to create some custom iris effects. And the bad thing about that is that those settings don't work if we use the custom iris option, and you can use a colored iris. For example, if we change the color of this layer, let's see, something like that, it's going to update and it will be with a color or it will be gray. So I think the best option is to keep it 100% white, but it depends on what you're working on, so that's a good option to have. And let's reset this, and basically the options are the same, as you can see. And for the highlight selection, I already covered that, and we have a couple other options right here. To explain these options, we are going to create a new layer. For example, let's type AETUTS plus, and let's put this right here, and let's cut the effect and apply it to this layer here. And if we select our background to be the image behind this and reduce the blur, so let's reduce the blur and disable the highlights to see the effect better. We have a background distortion, which basically distorts the background around the edges of our front blurred objects, and it's like a blending it in a very strange way. And we have a distortion anti-aliasing, which is going to fix some pixels or defects and basically increase the quality of the background distortion. So as you can see, we have anti-aliasing issues right here, and if we set this to 10, it's fixed. And sure, it takes more time to render, but I think the quality is more important than the render time. So basically that's a cool option to have depending on what you're doing. And of course we have a gamma correction again, which is on by default, but you can tweak it as needed. So that's everything for the Lenscare blur plugins. Hope this tutorial was useful for you, and hope you get those cool plugins and play around with them. I've worked on several projects using these plugins, and me and my clients are pretty happy with the effects, so go and get them and increase the quality of your work. So once again, I'm Stefan for AETUTS.com, and we'll see you next time.